Pixar's movie Up paints a crazy image where an elderly man attaches thousands of balloons to his house in an attempt to fly to a faraway land. This was his life's dream. Believe it or not, today's story is very similar to the animated movie. Hello Storyticians, similar to what Larry Walters did. Today's story is about a man who attempted to fly attached to 57 balloons and then skydive back to the mainland. Let's see what happened. Before we get to the day he took off to the skies, let's get to know the man behind the crazy plan. The main character of our story was born to Thomas D. Walsh and Anne Walsh on October 19, 1959. His name was Kevin Walsh, and he was married to Christine M. Riley. He was also the founder of 3 different companies, 2 of which are multi-million-dollar businesses that are still in operation today. Kevin's passion was clearly the sky. He performed more than 2,000 skydives in his lifetime, and he accumulated more than 3,000 flight hours as a pilot. He was also a mountain climber, which isn't exactly flying, but it sure is reaching the skies. Curious fact, he was a huge fan of George Orwell's novel 1984. In this book, published in 1949, the author predicts a scary future for the people living in 1984. We are not going too deep, but all that you need to know is that George Orwell was a huge fan of our channel Among Stories, and he asked if you could give this video a like. Just kidding, he probably never said that, but it helps us out. Now let's continue with the story. So Kevin was a huge fan of a book that predicted a terrible future in 1984. The year was approaching, and he thought it would be cool to start 1984 on a positive note, disregarding the terrible future the book predicted and injecting some optimism. This is what he said about it. I wanted to do something that would celebrate the arrival of the new year, despite Orwell's ominous warning. Now many of us will probably throw a party, do a small social media campaign, or celebrate the new year with something simple and sober. That wasn't Kevin though. He created a crazy plan to do something unique. He was going to tie himself to 57 balloons, fly up from Stowe, Massachusetts, and be carried by the wind to Boston Common. Once the destination was reached, he planned to jump and skydive directly into a majestic landing. So there he was. It was 8 AM on January 1st, 1984. With the help from his friends, Kevin was already tied to 57 balloons, arranged in a 151-foot tall tower of helium weather balloons. He called them Aprialis, a joining together of the words appreciation and reality. He planned to take off, then fly 23 miles and complete a journey that would jumpstart the year on a positive note. Although we did say that he planned this for a long time, there were still problems on the day of the flight. For starters, to take off he asked a friend to cut the rope that was holding him to the ground, but his friend didn't have a knife. Strangely, Kevin was so eager to go up that he decided to give his friend the only knife that he had, which, in our opinion, was the riskiest of plays. His friend followed instructions and went straight to cut the rope. The balloons were so strong that he barely managed to touch the rope and the main hookup line broke. Kevin was launched up as if a stretched rubber band had been released. The acceleration was unprecedented, even for Kevin who had already flown on airplanes, helicopters and even hot air balloons. But this was different. The takeoff was too strong. The balloons were raging, shaking around, bouncing with each other. Kevin got to 2,000 feet in a matter of seconds. He quickly noticed that the 15-foot anchor was dangling off the strap on his right thigh. He knew that it would probably get tangled with his canopy on deployment and kill him. But there was nothing he could do at that point. He clearly didn't stop there. Eventually, he reached about 8,000 or 9,000 feet of altitude, with no altimeter, no knife, a hanging anchor, and generally little to no control over his flight. Yet, he experienced some beautiful things in the air. There wasn't much noise, but he could hear a dog barking in the distance, and the view was out of this world. The winds were perfect as planned, taking Kevin to Boston in a record time. The tranquility lasted for a while. Kevin even noticed some sparkles in the air moving around him. He thought they might have been ice crystals. They were going down, until suddenly they were no longer moving. They were staying around the same height as he was, so he could take a closer look. Kevin was horrified when he recognized there were parts of exploded balloons above him. They no longer seemed to be traveling down because Kevin was traveling with them. He was falling and doing it faster and faster. Afraid as he was and filled with adrenaline, Kevin was forced to release himself from the balloons and engage in a freefall. Everything happened fast and he couldn't act as quick as he wanted. It took him over 8 seconds just to position his body to face the earth while falling. He activated the deployment mechanism, but his parachute took a long time to open. Finally, it did. Kevin wasn't safe though. He was falling far away from where he had planned. He had to steer to avoid a horse farm, and then again to avoid attacking guard dogs. He finally managed to land in a field without knowing where he was or where to go. Using his experience, he found a way. He eventually found a store with a payphone and called a ride home. This isn't the end of his tale though. The story eventually hit local and then national news. Many were obsessed and inspired by his story, but the Federal Aviation Administration had a different take on it. They ended up fining Kevin a whopping $4,000 because he broke aviation rules. 30 years later, Kevin wrote a book about his flight. There is also a page called 57balloons.com, which also details what happened. What a crazy and bold pioneer Kevin was, don't you think? Let us know in the comments. Halloween just passed, but here are 5 of the worst things that have happened on Halloween. Click here to watch that now. Now, go and live the boldest of all stories. The story of your life.